started recording, and we are going to get started with this meetup. So welcome everybody. This is the 7th Knative Community Meetup. As I was saying before, this is going to be the last meetup of 2020, and we hope to see you again in January. We may have a few new people here because we share this event with KubeCon North America participants. So if anybody is here for the first time, welcome, and we hope that you can come and join us in other events as well. And without any further ado, I am going to go ahead and start with the agenda. We have working group updates from Client Working Group.
Yeah, hello. So first of all, thanks to all the contributors to the latest client release, which is 0.19. We have released this last week. And we have, of course, tons of new features, but I think some of the highlights are that we have now introduced a KN service apply, which allows you for declarative management of Knative services. And yeah, so give it a try. It's a client-based apply, so it might have still some rough edges, but actually you can already use it. But actually we are always keen on getting feedback on this new feature. As well as on the other feature, which is a KN service import. This is the counterpart to the KN service export that we have introduced in the release before. It's also marked as experimental, so it allows you to export and import KN services along with its revisions that are active. Active means that they receive a certain amount of traffic, so that they're part of a traffic split. And yeah, so that way you can easily transport your services from one installation to the other one. Yeah, that's more or less it. So actually, again, it's experimental. So if you have any feedback on this new feature, we are really super happy if you just jump to the Slack or open issues or what channel we have. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Roland. And I think next is Matt or someone else with Serving Working Group.
Yeah, so Roland inspired me to advertise and solicit feedback on a new domain mapping resource that Dr. Jules added in our most recent release. The domain mapping resource basically lets you put vanity URLs in front of your Knative services and hopefully soon other things within Knative. So, instead of having the sort of rigid foo.bar, cluster domain suffix, you can say, www.mattsAwesomeblog.com and serve on friendlier URLs if you want to. It's an alpha, and there's a vanity domains channel on Slack if you want to ask specific questions about that. But you can ask a question in any of our dozens of other channels too. And I'm sure we'll be happy to answer it. But yeah, try it out, give feedback. It isn't integrated with things like AutoTLS yet, but that's on the plan. And I think it works with Istio, Contour, and Courier. As maybe others, but those are the ones that I have confidence saying, report bugs if it doesn't work with those. So.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. And to give feedback, Matt added a channel on Slack, which is vanity-domains. So yeah, feel free to provide feedback that way. Any other updates that may not be in the agenda? Anybody? Okay. Cool. So we are going to move to the demo part of the meeting. Matt is going to present a demo about Mink, and I think you should be able to share your screen, so feel free to test that.
All right, so hold on, let me make the little people window small so that I can see my screen. Can everyone see my screen? I'm sharing my whole screen because I'm gonna jump between windows as part of the domain, or sorry, demo. Okay, so Mink. Hopefully we get through it all. I have a whole bunch of stuff that I want to demo. So apologies if I talk fast. Okay, so what is Mink? Mink is really sort of two things. It started out as sort of a little distribution that was intended to sort of showcase how with our controller architecture, you can take the set of things that we ship as like a whole bunch of independent things upstream and shrink wrap them into, you know, much smaller form factor for how you want to ship Knative downstream. And so we'll see that in just a second. And then the other piece is a CLI that started with me sort of wanting to try out the KN plugin model, but also start to sort of think about things you could do with the set of components that have been shrink wrapped into Mink to sort of tie together, you know, the things that, you know, we try and keep sort of at arm's length upstream, like serving and eventing, and the artist formerly known as Build, which is Tekton. So I'm going to switch over to my console here. So one of the things, this is a long command, but I can talk while it runs. So we're going to run Mink install command. This is just going to set up the components on the cluster that correspond to the release of the CLI that's been installed. I haven't yet set it up to do anything with DNS, so I'm going to patch the mink.dev domain into this and then print the service so we can set up DNS. So while that's running,
So we don't see your screen, Matt.
You don't see my...
I do.
I see it.
Oh.
I see it.
Yeah, we see it.
Okay, I'm gonna keep talking. Hopefully it's on the recording. So this is a local build of it, so it's installing it from, you know, something that was built locally. If you were running the release, this would be installing from the latest or the GitHub release corresponding to the Mink build. This is running against an EKS cluster, and you can see it spun up a couple control plane pods and then a couple data plane pods. The control plane pods are running serving with net contour, contour eventing with the multi-tenant broker, the sugar controller, and all the core sources. And then the data plane is running all of the things that we have on the data path in Knative. So activator, the envoys for your ingress, the activator, et cetera. And then it also installs the in-memory controller, or sorry, I always say in-memory controller, in-memory channel as well. So I printed out the services so that I could set up a little CNAME rule real quick. So I'll plop that in. And so if we take a look at this, right, let's see, 33. So in about 40 seconds, it installed basically the entire Mink control plane, data plane, the in-memory channel, and, you know, it waits for all of that to be up and ready. And so all of that is now running on my EKS cluster here. And then DNS should be set up now. It runs TLS by default. So, okay, so we just installed a whole bunch of stuff, and it's actually not running that many things. The 3 control plane nodes and the 4 data plane nodes is because it installs in an HA configuration by default. So the control plane is running as a stateful set that distributes the keys over those replicas. And the data plane's running as a daemon set. So if we were running this on a 1-node cluster, that would shrink down and scale up as your cluster scales up. So, okay, so let's see. So now that I have all of those things installed on my cluster, right? The next thing that I wanted to do was start to play with basically deploying, you know, leveraging the fact that all of those things are there to make it really easy to get started and deploy things to that cluster, right? So so I'm in the docs repo here, and I effectively wanted to be able to write something like kn service create hello, and I, you know, deploy my, you know, hello world go sample. But, you know, we run into this thing where it's like, okay, image, right? And now I need to be able to build this Docker file and you know, do all that. So with Tekton available, right, I can do builds against this cluster. And so basically, there's this Mink build command where you can tell it what directory to build. And let's see, It's a long path, so I gotta concentrate. Hello world, hello, go. Okay, so
just a note, Matt, you've got a typo now. Director equals docs settings, etc.
Thank you. It's way worse if the typo is in the other half of the command because it doesn't tell you till the build completes. But thank you, Jacques. So, okay, I'm gonna kick that off. So what this is gonna do, right, is let me show what's running over here. What this is doing is it's basically taking that directory, it's uploading it to a registry that I've configured. I think I'm using GitHub's container registry. As a self-extracting container image, and then runs that as the first step in a task run before Knative, which does the Docker file build. You can see the output streaming here to standard error. And I've redirected standard out, which is going to be the image digest, to kn service create. So as soon as this is done, this is going to, you can see the build here running on the cluster. As soon as this is done, we will see kn kick off and start to deploy. I'm just moving the Zoom things out of my way so I can see this. And in just a moment, this will return. I'm gonna wait a little bit longer because this didn't give me the TLS URL. You can see it's configuring the HTTPS challenge, and hopefully in just a second, this will give me the HTTPS URL. We'll see how fast Let's Encrypt is today. Usually it's, there we go. So if we copy this URL and curl it, right? Boom, hello world. So, okay, these things have been up for about 5 minutes. So in 5 minutes, we went from blank Kubernetes cluster to running all of serving, eventing, Tekton with TLS, DNS, and built from source and deployed an image. So one more thing. Let's see. So if I dump the service that we just deployed, and I grab the image that it's running and look at it in Crane, if you were watching carefully, you might have picked this up, but I'm actually running this all on a Graviton EKS cluster, right? So this is all running on ARM, right? It's running the self-extracting source context was uploaded multi-arch. It runs multi-arch Knative image. It's running all the multi-arch, envoys, all the Knative and Tekton components. And so basically, it installs on whichever flavor of cluster you want. The one thing that doesn't work, which is going to be the next part of the demo, is unfortunately build packs. And I think that's mostly because I'm not aware of anyone who has yet produced an ARM64 build pack builder. But for that, we're going to switch over to a GKE cluster for the rest of my demo. And GKE runs a lot of stuff. So I'm just going to show the default namespace for this one. But this, I've installed Mink on this cluster already. And yeah, so, but nothing is running. If I say kubectl get kservice, all namespaces, there's no Knative services deployed or anything yet. So, okay, so build packs. So if I could just do the same old demo with the docs repo and replace Mink build with Mink build packs, or sorry, Mink build pack, and it would do a build pack build of that same Hello World Go sample. And it works, it wouldn't leverage the Docker file. And through the magic of build packs, it would detect, hey, it's Go, and do the right thing and build a Go container image, which is pretty nice. But one of the nice things about build pack is that a lot of folks are starting to leverage it for higher level experiences. So instead of producing applications where you have to write the HTTP server and deal with all that, you just write a function, and then as part of the build pack lifecycle, it gets wrapped up in the HTTP server, and you don't worry about it. You just deal with functions and deploy that. I wanted to show some of that, but as folks go from sort of monolithic apps to microservices to functions, right? You also go from really writing one thing to writing tens of things to writing hundreds of things, right? And the complexity sort of shifts around, right? So generally when you were dealing with one monolith, right, you're now dealing with quite a few functions, right? And so I didn't want to just demo something like Mink build pack where you're iterating on a single thing, which you can do, as we just showed a second ago. I wanted to think through what it was like to deploy sort of a full logical application, which may consist of a number of different functions and other things like sources and whatnot, and are all sort of wired together in terms of triggers and events and whatnot. So, okay, so I have a little sample here. Basically what we're gonna do here is we're just gonna run Mink apply. And then this is going, I'll talk through what this is gonna do while it's running. Takes about a minute and a half. If history is any indicator, it spits out some errors because it tries to detect the user to run as, but ignore that. That's a GCP builder thing. So I'm using the GCP build packs here for Node, as you can, oh, I didn't put it in the repo name here. It's in the repo name here. Okay, so this is what we're deploying right now. So I'm using Scotty's little graph tool to visualize this. It's not running on the cluster now, but it was obviously when I took the screenshot. So basically that one command is basically deploying a whole bunch of stuff. So it's deploying a ping source that dumps events onto the default broker. It's deploying sockeye, which is unfiltered and gonna let us visualize the events flowing through the system. And then it's gonna deploy 5 functions which key off of the ping events that come off the ping source and do some simple mutation to the event and dump it back on the broker so that we can see what they did. So it's a pretty simple toy app, but one of the things that I wanted to sort of demonstrate is how small we can get the sort of incremental cost of adding new functions to the system, right? And so you can see here, okay, all the builds just completed, and then it applied a whole bunch of stuff. And you can see over here, that's good timing. So I didn't even rehearse that. All right, so you can see here it's spinning up all these functions here. And if I refresh sockeye, it should be up. And the ping source fires every minute. Good timing. Okay, so hopefully everything was wired up when that fired. It looks like a couple things were still wiring up, but the ping source produces this fixed payload with A is a number, B is another number, 11 and 3. And then each of the little functions responding to this, you can see this is exponent. It does A to the B and then returns it to the broker, and B is B to the A. So each of these does just a little trivial transformation of the event and drops it back on the broker. I did the same schema so you could chain these things together and sort of play with triggers and different orders and whatnot. But really the amount of code you end up writing for these things is very, very small. So let's take a look at that. So if we go into, for instance, the add function, right? So there's 3 files in here, and it's more or less the same 3 files in each of the functions. They're very uniform. So if we look at the actual index.js, I am a Node noob, so please don't judge my terrible Node. But there's a simple little mutation function here that takes in the JSON payload. And you can see, adds that returns something with A and B, where A is just A plus B of what comes in, and B is A minus B of what comes in. And all of these are just trivial little things that do stuff like that. And then this is what we actually wrap as a function, which basically applies that mutation here to a cloud event that comes in and then returns it with a new cloud event. And this changes the type, so it tells us what function really reacted to it so that we can visualize that on sockeye. The next bit of what's going on here is overrides the TOML. So this is a little bit of the duct tape showing through in terms of how I put some of this together. So this mirrors the construct of project.toml in build pack. So you can see I'm using the Google Functions build pack and telling it to use the add function. This is, build packs right now, and really this is the pack CLI has this concept of project.toml, but it doesn't really have a good way, in my opinion, to deal with sort of producing n things from a single repo. So that's where this override toml thing comes in. And then service.yaml. So here's where the magic happens. So a lot of this idea of sort of trying to squeeze the incremental complexity came from some of the learnings we have with Co. And so with Co, like I think hopefully we've reached the point where a lot of folks within the community sort of appreciate that, producing new containers is, a very low barrier to entry. And that's not really what folks think of as the release artifacts anymore. We think of things like the resolved YAMLs. So you can see in this YAML, this one piece of magic here where sort of extending the idea of the co URIs, where I say co import path, Mink apply, Mink resolve supports, it actually supports co, but also build pack and Docker file. So you can take the sort of co workflow and use it to build things for many languages with build packs or Docker files, and start to leverage some of the stuff in build packs like function frameworks to build higher level experiences. So what this is basically saying is within the context of the sort of -- directory bundle that's uploaded, build the for build pack, build the overrides TOML within the add directory. And so each of the functions is going to specify the path to their config file for build pack that does that. If we were to use Docker file here, it would effectively be the directory in which to find the Docker file. And Co, it's compatible with Co. So this is cluster local service. It's setting up a trigger on the default broker, and it has the ping filter here. If we were to change this, since this is add, if we were to change this to divide, we would start to sort of chain together our events into a deeper chain than the sort of flat thing we have right now. And then this delivers the events to the add function. I think it would be super cool to see this go away with something like Scotty's auto trigger, but yeah, right now this is actually a surprising amount of YAML, but like to do this in vanilla Kates would be much more complex. So okay, so I think we got, so let's see all of the functions firing. They should have all fired by now. Okay, so random basically uses the inputs to bound generating random numbers. We see divide here. We see swap just transposes them. We already saw exponent. Add is 11 plus 3 and 11 minus 3. Yeah, and divide is 11 divided by 3, 11 mod 3. So all super simple little functions, but I got bored of adding them after 5. So, so yeah, but the overhead of each of them got squeezed, I think, pretty low. I see a lot of things in chat. I don't know if folks are adding or asking me things, but I think that's all I had for the screen share, unless folks had questions. So I am happy to open it up for questions, and hopefully I covered everything I meant to cover.
Thank you so much, Matt. Yeah, I think my mic is working. Let me see. I'm going to change the view. Oh, great. Thank you. Do we have any comments to discuss this demo as a group right now? Any questions? I saw some questions on the chat. So maybe Alec, if you want to speak up, if that's a possibility for you, would you like to ask your questions?
Sure, I can speak up. It's just a very basic question. So like there is a lot of functionality. At the beginning you were saying it's like a distribution, So how is it different from what is today if you install Knative and Tekton in some cluster? There is some additional functionality that you add, like support for build packs, something
So
else?
that's a good question. So if you were to install all the upstream stuff, right? Upstream is very unopinionated, right? We ship serving core, we ship net Istio, we ship Istio. They're all basically in separate YAMLs, run as separate things, and we do that because it's very unopinionated, right? Like we don't want to sort of guide your hand towards one option or the other, right? Like they're all great choices, but it leads to complexity setting things up, right? You have to make a whole bunch of choices, right? Which channel do I want to use? Which broker do I want to use? Which ingress do I want to use? Do I want to set up TLS and whatnot, right? So what Mink does is it basically takes a position on some of those sort of getting started opinions and glues them together in a way where it's not distributing, different YAML, different deployment, different whatnot for all of those things. And it's shrink wrapped into effectively a single controller process that handles all of it, right? The APIs that are exposed and everything is identical to upstream. It is identical. It exposes 0 additional APIs over Knative serving and Knative eventing. So shout out to Carlos. So I believe on last Friday, Carlos, I believe, managed to deploy this sample, the Mink apply Node.js sample, to OpenShift serverless using OpenShift pipelines, right? So in terms of the server side bits, it's a shrink wrapped set of things, but like there are no additional APIs. So things like doing the build packs, it's really just creating a task run directly that invokes the appropriate container images using Tekton APIs. Yeah, so, and you don't have to deploy Knative services with it. So one of my fun things to beat on this is, since it supports Co, actually part of the reason I added Co was like, I wanted to make sure it worked. So I build Mink with Mink. So, so Mink builds with Co, but then once it's deployed, you can then use Mink to then rebuild Mink, since Mink apply supports Co prefixes. So, I think that does like 20 co-publish builds. And I have the same test for Docker files too, where it self-hosts Mink with Mink. Build packs doesn't quite work for reasons, and is mostly related to how we assume Co has laid things out certain ways, which it's hard to get build packs to lay things out the same way. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe I will ask, first of all, really awesome little Mink, I would say, but yeah, but let me rephrase the same question actually, because I'm wondering, is it actually a toy for you or experiment, or do you want to support that? What is your plan with that, basically?
So that's a good question. There's an open issue right now to sort of move it into Sandbox and sort of support it better. So it's not in Mike Moor Mink. I think there's some interesting questions about the home and how we tie some of it together. Oh, I forgot my my cheesiest little anecdote. So I said I started the Mink CLI to play with KN plugins. So it turns out KNIM is Mink backwards. So you can also invoke it all through KNIM. Yeah, I was invoking it through Mink out of habit. Yeah, so there's a few interesting things, right? So things like Mink apply actually don't need Knative running on the cluster unless you're going to target Knative services. It just happens that Knative services are probably one of the best ways, in my opinion, I'm a little biased, to run the sorts of functions and whatnot that come out of stuff like build packs. So that might even make more sense in the context of something like the Tekton CLI, but I think the idea of having sort of a nice getting started experience, where folks can very easily get up and running with a thing, and have things that start to tie together some of these different pieces of sort of user experience that really, I think that we are starting to realize the sort of potential of what we set out to do 3 years ago with build and serving and eventing to sort of start to tie together sort of function style experiences on top of Knative. So I'm super stoked to see this, and I'm interested in sort of discussing how we make it real. I've been starting to poke at the topic of like, should we be talking about sort of standard build packs for cloud events, since a lot of folks have jumped onto that bandwagon. And that conversation may actually, since a lot of folks here are interested in that, it may actually make more sense to have that conversation in the context of something like the build pack community or the serverless working group. But yeah. But it's something that could be leveraged in the context of this, right? Like this is not running like my crazy build packs. That demo is using the GCP build packs. Mink uses I think Paketo build packs by default. I'm testing it with both of those and the Boson build packs that the OpenShift folks have been doing, but they're all running slightly different build packs. So I'm not keeping up with chat. There's a whole.
I think there are a few questions from Michael. Michael, would you like to unmute?
Sure. This is Max. So I guess the quick question is Matt, about the source to image work that Red Hat and a few others are doing, right?
Yeah.
So I guess you could integrate that easily there too, right? Instead of kicking off Tekton. I guess they're doing the work to, build pack like convert your directory into an image.
Yeah. So the CanFast, I'm pretty sure, is using pack under the hood locally, and I'm not gonna lie, I don't have Docker locally, and I don't want Docker locally. So I'm a big fan of being able to run all. I've been reviewing things like all the Cloud Event Go and blah 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 samples. I reviewed all those PRs by like cloning folks' repos, and then Mink build the build pack and deploy it with KN. So I am a big fan of not having to run Docker locally, but I think being able to leverage something like pack for local as well, I think makes a lot of sense too for folks who are into that. But yeah, so like, I mean, here's a fun one, right? What happens when folks are using different hardware locally, right? Then, thank you, Apple, for that M1 problem, right? This would run fine on that because I don't need Docker locally. It stitches together the build context and everything co-style, and again, multi-arch. So, assuming the actual build process you're invoking can run on that cluster, it just works. I think Conoco's multi-arch is only AMD64 and ARM64 right now, but it's pretty trivial to add architectures to that. I think the main thing is testing. The Co image that's being produced is based on the Golang image, so it has so many architectures. And then, like I said, with build packs, the main thing is I just don't know of a multi-arch build pack to play with. Otherwise, I think it would work.
Okay, that's fair. I had one more question, but maybe you can be quick in the answer because there's other people that have questions. So I'm just wondering your vision for this. Do you intend to have do you see multiple, distribution that people will do depending on how they use Knative or maybe modified version of Mink? I mean, what's your vision?
That's a good question, right? So this was very intentionally created outside of Knative when I first started it, because you know, I view upstream as very unopinionated, right? And you know, we don't want things under Knative to really be, you know, biasing towards, you know, one option or another option, right? So with some of the clarity around things like Sandbox, right? You know, I see it sort of like, you know, Kind and Minikube. I fully expect that folks will have different opinions from, you know, what's bundled in here. But like I said, it started as a way of sort of showing folks that you can do this. And, you know, a lot of what we did was sort of designed to be able to recombine these things downstream. So like, you know, if, you know, Google is or IBM is very committed to saying, hey, you know, we know that the distribution we're going to ship is always going to have Istio, right? They can basically combine those things together and not have to run additional stuff on your cluster, you know, if they can be combined and, you know, shrink the footprint ever so slightly. It turns out it's not that slightly when you're running serving and ingress and TLS and eventing and sugar controller and the multi-tenant.
And don't forget testing also. So
yeah. So
all right, thank you, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
I want to give other people a chance to ask you questions. That's why love the answers.
Thank you, Max. I think Omer has other questions as well.
Yeah, I think sort of along the same lines. I guess, like, do you envision this or something like it to be sort of the first meaningful interaction that new folks would have with Knative? And then piggybacking off that, if your answer is yes, like, have you tested this with like Minikube? So like I could like, because I'm imagining like you would basically go to the Knative website and be like, oh, this is, I'll just get started with this. Like, is that the idea?
So I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, I think it's a possibility, but you know, I think it'll depend on sort of what other distributions crop up, right? So we've talked about sort of a starter distribution in the past, which might just have the Knative bits, right? Like one of the opinions that this has, right, is it pulls in Tekton, right, which you know, moved out of the house a couple of years ago. So you know, it's not Knative anymore. But so it may be that we want that getting started experience to be focused on just Knative bits. But you know, I think that ultimately, you know, it's something that you know, I would ask the community, you know, what we think the sort of first experience folks should have is. But I certainly enjoy it, and I'm trying to make it sort of simple to get started on one night. So you asked about Minikube. I haven't tried Minikube, but I have a whole bunch of end-to-end tests with this running against Kind on GitHub Actions, which is awesome and free and runs a lot of testing for it. And so, you know, Mink install is bootstrapping, you know, the little Kind cluster with Mink, but it is, you know, there's a whole bunch of sort of Kind setup to that. I think it'd be interesting to play around with having something that enabled you to do something like Kind create cluster locally, and you know, bootstrap a whole Knative environment from nothing, sort of, excuse me, sort of like Mink install, but like Mink create me a whole little Kind cluster sort of thing. But I don't have Docker locally, so it's hard to develop stuff that works with Kind.
Fair enough. Thank you.
I think next is Jules. No, that was more of a comment. Alec had a question. Alec, would you like to speak up?
Oh, yeah, no, Jules had a quick question. Is there equivalent to co-resolve? Yeah, you can use Mink resolve, and it builds with co or Dockerfile or build pack and gives you the YAML. So if in principle you wanted to bootstrap a new cluster with that sample I built, you could, and you had pre-built it. Oh, you can also use this to separate out build from deploy, which is another key thing, right? Just like we co-resolve once, ship a release YAML, and people can install that on many, many, many clusters. You can use Mink resolve to go build these things on a build cluster, take the YAML, and then deploy that to one or more clusters that are separate. You can also do that with the composition if you pass different build contexts to, kube contexts to Mink build and KN. I don't know that I've plumbed it through Mink, so I'm hoping KN has plumbed that through. But those are other things where you can start to sort of split the build and deploy clusters apart. Yeah, Mink resolve works, and yeah. So
I think we have Alec, and then we have one more question. We have a raised hand, but first let's go to Alec's question. Alec, would you like to unmute?
I think it's me again, so sorry about it. That is just a, when I hear that Buildpack make everything easier, I build non-trivial applications with Buildpack, and I fight it with all the updates to Buildpacks, like libraries and whatnot. So I wonder, what is your, experience, especially about, like, you deploy something, oh, it's not working because Buildpack was changed.
Oh, that's a very good question, and you're asking a Co junkie. So I love Co, but people are always like, but I don't want to write stuff in Go, and so this brings Co sort of experience to other languages. Buildpacks, I think one of the things I've struggled with too is repos with a whole bunch of stuff building out of the same repo. But I think it's one of the things where as applications shrink and you have microservices and functions, you aren't going to want a whole new repo for every function that you build. And so I think Buildpacks is going to have to evolve a little bit to be able to produce things out of more complex repos and deal with some of that complexity better. In terms of changing libraries, and I don't know if your comment was about the rebasing stuff, but there are a bunch of other fancy things around Buildpacks that I think things like rebasing rely on like ABI guarantees. In terms of the same build not working, I think my thought would be that if you use the same builder, I would expect some amount of determinism there. If you use a tag, then it's sort of YOLO mode. And you might get different results build to build, but yeah, I don't have a ton of in-depth experience with Buildpacks to really comment on it.
Alec, I think you're probably thinking of like the Cloud Foundry experience, where
or in general, if you push non-trivial code into somewhere, possibly multiple locations that have different setup, like one is Mink, another maybe something else. How do I know, that everything works the way that it's supposed to, unless I tested it with exact version and can guarantee that in every location it will be running exactly the same.
Yeah,
so describe containers, no?
I think that's one of the intents of things like co-resolve and Mink resolve, right? So that you can basically, Mink apply and co-apply is great for development, right? Because I can build and deploy my entire application like in one go, right? But it's not what you want for release, right? You want to be able to sort of build the thing, qualify the thing in one place, and then deploy it to other places. And so being able to separate those is, I think, very intentional. And because you're doing it by digest, resolve, I am big digest Kool-Aid person. So everything's by digest. So it's not going to change out from under you unless you go into the YAMLs and you change it. The YAML should work everywhere. I mean, the main thing will be I won't go into the crazy.
I feel like being forced into the position defending Buildpacks, which is never something I want to be doing. Cloud native Buildpacks, the more modern Buildpacks, do result in container images, right? Like the old kind of Buildpacks were pretty opaque, and you sort of threw your code in there and hoped it still worked, and it could break behind you. But the new cloud native Buildpacks, they're just kind of a different way of doing a Docker file style thing, right? The result is still an image which is shard and isn't going to change, on the output side. Okay, that's my defending Buildpacks for today.
So this is all deploying everything by image digests, including for Buildpacks, it's using the cloud native Buildpack stuff. with whatever builder you specified. And because it's by digest, it actually won't work with things like rebasing. I mean, in the same way that, serving resolves tags to digest, right? You would need to stage a new revision if you rebased it. And so the things doing things like rebasing would need to interact with the Knative service lifecycle anyways in order to stage a new revision if it were rebasing your application. But so the digests that are being inserted there, as Jules indicated, right, they aren't going to change out from under you. And my point about resolve is if you then take that and you deploy it across context, you should get exactly the same thing because, it's checking that checksum every time it pulls that image.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? I saw a hand raised at one point.
Yeah, I was wondering, Matt, about this Mink is funny because I don't know if you know this project. This is called K3S. It's actually Kubernetes built into one binary. So I thought maybe build Mink, all of that Knative, all Knative builds and all other bits into another binary and deploy just 2 pods, and you will have Kubernetes will Knative.
Yes. So I mean, I would say, let's see. I would say it's somewhat similar to my rough understanding of that, right? K3S is building everything into a single binary. Mink is effectively doing that for all of these sort of processes that are sort of compatible, right? So the way we've designed the controller architecture, right, it's all using shared main and it sort of figures out things like the informers and whatnot it needs to start out. So Mink, the code for Mink before I added the CLI was, was basically just main.go. And it linked in a bunch of different entry points that it wanted to run as a single controller process. And then different config that sort of oriented things in various ways. So running the various data planes as different containers in the same sort of data plane pod, et cetera. But the way Mink is combining all of those controller processes in the control plane pod is similar in principle to the idea of just link it all together into one binary. I don't think we want to do that for everything because I would really love it if our Q-proxy sidecar, for instance, went on a diet. It's doing something sort of like that in principle. But I'm also sort of opposed to the idea that you need to combine everything into a single container in order to get that sort of tiny footprint. Since I think the direction that things are headed in terms of sort of modern application development is you stop thinking about the fact that you have n containers, right? Containers are an implementation detail, right? Like I'm a total container image nerd, and the goal of Co is to get people to stop thinking about them. So hopefully, with things like being able to do this with BuildPack, well, unfortunately, Dockerfile is probably not going to help with that. But with things like BuildPack, hopefully you can have a higher level source-oriented experience where people just stop worrying about how it goes into the container and, just works TM.
Great. So do we have any more comments or questions? This demonstrates, oh yeah, go ahead, Matt.
I was just gonna say, if you get me talking, I'll talk about this all day. So feel free to reach out to me if you want to know more about this. There's a lot going on this. It's something I've sort of been poking at intermittently for better part of a year now. So I think it was actually Ben Browning asking about some of our controller stuff that prompted me to put it together. But it's sort of slowly grown over time, and so yeah.
And thank you so much for sharing it today. It certainly awoke a lot of interest from the community. I have a couple more updates or reminders for people. Please take the survey. I shared the link on the chat box. So tell us how you feel about this meetup. If you are eligible, please remember to vote for the Knative steering committee election. there are only 4 days to file an exemption, to fill out the exemption form. I'm going to be sharing this on the Knative Slack space. And Paul had an update. Paul, would you like to unmute? He may
yes.
Yes.
I just wanted to let everybody know we're going to have an office hours thing that honestly, it's not clear to me whether it's OpenShift TV or OpenShift Commons or KubeCon or whatever, but it will begin in, I think about an hour, and the link is in the agenda if you'd like to join us. Thanks.
Thank you, Paul. And we have 5 minutes left because we had a really good, interesting conversation. So would people like to go into small rooms, or should we give everybody 5 minutes back? Can I see like some thumbs up? If I don't see thumbs up, I will probably 5 minutes back. Okay, sounds good. Thank you everybody for joining. Our next meetup is gonna be in January. Have an excellent holiday season, festivals, and I will see you on the other end.